Hello, I am Nyasha. I'm with the Career Development Department of St. Mary's College, and I'm here with Rafael. If you'd like to introduce yourself really quickly.
Sure. My name is Rafael Zapata, and since January of this year, I've been first interim Associate Vice President of Inclusion and Belonging, and since August, I've been in that role permanently. So I've been here about almost just over 10 months.
Nice, nice. And can you share a bit about your journey, what got you to this position right now?
So I'll just share my professional journey. I am a first generation college student. I was born and raised in New York City. I went to Iona College right outside the city, got a degree in sociology, made my way to Arizona State University for a master's degree, and had the privilege of getting a fellowship for the University of Pennsylvania to work on a PhD where I was working on research on racial and income inequality. And after 3 years, however, I realized that I was being tracked to be a sociologist with a strong concentration in research. Without, my goal was yes to do research, to teach, but also to be engaged in local communities. But that wasn't kind of how that was going to unfold. So I switched tracks. I knew I liked working with young people, so I ended up working in higher education, but as an administrator. So my first job was at New York University in my hometown. I was there for about 2.5 years in a role supporting essentially students of color. I was an assistant director in a wonderful office. After 2.5 years, I got a call and I went to a small liberal arts college, Swarthmore College. Was there for about 10 years as the director of the Intercultural Center and assistant dean. And then I took the first of two chief diversity officer roles, first at Providence College in Rhode Island, a Catholic institution, and I was there for 6 years. And then my most immediate role was back in my hometown at Fordham University as associate vice president and chief diversity officer, and I was there about 6 years, after which I took a break from October 2023. And then how I got to St. Mary's, just before Thanksgiving last year, I got a call about an interim role, and 6 weeks later, I was here in the snow on January 6th and 7th were snow days, but that's how I got here, and hadn't heard of St. Mary's, but I'm glad I did. It's been a wonderful time in my 10 months. So.
Awesome, awesome. And how has your identity informed your work in higher education and diversity leadership?
It's been inseparable. As I mentioned, I was first in my family to go to college. I come from a large family. My parents were both from the island of Puerto Rico. They met in New York City in the late 50s. And my two older sisters and I were born and raised there. And I have a huge extended family, so I always found connection, sense of self, just a sense of family, and just how you treat people. But I was also, I came up in New York City at a time, during a time of significant transition, kind of the post-civil rights movement, kind of backlash, white flight from cities, the beginning of harsh, the Rockefeller laws, the three strikes you're out laws, and the expansion of the prison industrial complex, essentially. And we also saw the shift in governmental investments from higher education, for example, to the prison system. And New York State and California and other states expanded those investments and and we saw a lot more people getting locked up. And at the same time, as a preteen and early teen, was a time of the crack epidemic. So and the violence that spawned. The AIDS also happened along those lines, both among the LGBTQ community, but also among people who used intravenous drugs, and those were issues that impacted our community. I went to high school in Harlem, all boys Catholic school, Black and Latino boys. Most of us would be first in our family, so it was an interesting time, just dealing with police, navigating. I grew up in public housing, very proud of that. Born and raised in the Chelsea projects. My family still lives there, but those kind of I guess what shaped my sense of possibility was that you saw so many smart people with potential, never getting a chance to achieve it because of violence, because of incarceration, sometimes because of chance, a chance encounter. But we also saw a lot of beauty, inspiration, care, community. So that always kept me grounded. One of my best friends was incarcerated for 17 years and still good friends. I was the best man at his wedding. Um, and so, those things always fill my mind. And for me, education was my way of, I wasn't necessarily that much smarter than a lot of other my classmates in high school or even grammar school. There were kids that I thought were, meant to kind of, their their journey was going to be limitless. Didn't always turn out that way. So I'm always humbled that somehow I got through that net as opposed to, so I take nothing for granted. So supporting talented young people, in a college context came natural for me. And I feel very blessed that I found purpose in my career. And it's not always easy, but it's certainly consistent with my values that everyone has dignity, everybody has potential, and that we need to nurture that, and that we also need to understand where everybody is coming from. It's not just, the work. How do we provide context that allows students to kind of to be themselves and kind of make mistakes, and but also be cared about and not feel like they have to fit a particular mold in order to be seen as being talented, having potential, and worthy of support.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Okay.
No, it's because like where the high school where I went to, there's a lot of specialty programs, but oftentimes it was blocked because like for like money reasons. So and like fun thing is with my schooling and a lot of the schools in my area, because I grew up around Baltimore, it was either you were like, like had a lot of money, particularly like especially with the white students, and those who were from lower income places, which were typically people of color, they didn't have the opportunity to excel in academics, so they couldn't go to the better schools. They couldn't do what they wanted to do.
Right.
And I only really got lucky because I excelled in like middle school and high school, which allowed me to go through those programs.
Sure.
But I saw with my like fellow peers who were like had very similar or the exact same background as me, not being able to do what they wanted, even though we were like at the same level intellectually.
Yeah. Potential wise, of course. Now, those programs, were those predominantly white programs that you found yourself in?
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
That must have been really hard, right? Because
it was like, it was hard. I definitely valued the programs.
Of course.
Don't get me wrong. They like helped me get like extra credits to come into this college and stuff like that. But it was a weird feeling of being in rooms where I was one of the few people
That's
of
tough.
color, and there's like this so much like fellows so much like pressure
absolutely
to perform better, so that way I could like break the stigma or stereotypes that surround my identity, and also feel like I was like proving to myself, like prove myself to like justify being in the room.
No, you're describing almost precisely this notion of stereotype threat. I don't know if you're familiar with this concept. This social psychologist Claude Steele talks about, when you're one of the only ones, there's, if you succeed, it's like, oh, okay. But if you don't, it's almost like, see, you know what I mean? And that is a lot of extra pressure. And one thing I appreciate about my high school, a lot of us, look, we were from some of the roughest neighborhoods, East Harlem, Central Harlem, the South Bronx. People came from as far as Jamaica, Queens. My school was called Rice High School, 124th Street in Lenox. You can't get more Central Harlem than that. And I love that, right? Because there's so much beauty, history, and culture there. But, a lot of us, we kind of knew we were smart, but we weren't always necessarily studious. But, I was grateful that, I was kind of like in the quote unquote highest class. And then you had students, in a class that may be slower paced, but all of us were in each class, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to like being stratified, like, oh, the top students are of a particular racial and economic background, and the quote unquote, slower paced classes are people of a certain lower kind of stigmatized racial background, quote unquote, or lower economic status. So I feel like I was grateful that we didn't have to worry about that because it was just us. There were like no white students in the school.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to like the schooling that my parents went through because they're from the Caribbean as well. So they went to school with a lot of people of color and hardly any white students. So when they came to the States for college, they had a big like culture shock when it came to the stigma and like the racial culture around education and work.
Right.
Because they just were not used to it in any way, shape, or form.
And I want to note that in high school, I remember my freshman year. Again, a lot of us were studious. We earned like these half scholarships to attend the school. But it's interesting. I remember being in class with a fellow Puerto Rican student, and we got a quiz for a class, and I got like an 80, and I was like, all right. I'm like, I didn't study really hard, but I got an 80, it's fine. Yeah. This brother Alberto Tito, he wasn't, showing his grade, but I kind of caught a peek, and he got like 100. Ooh. And then I was like, I paused mentally and physically. I was like, and when I was looking at him, my surprise was like, oh, because this brother was like a b-boy, like he used to braid, and he had a bop and everything. He didn't present the studious face, and in that way, he and I were similar. But he was performing more to his potential, and so my surprise put pause on me and saying, "Am I putting those limitations on myself, regardless of where they came from?" It's not always clear. Maybe it was class, maybe that combination of class and race and ethnicity. And it gave me pause, and I'm like, look, I'm playing myself, meaning that I'm under kind of estimating or underperforming, and okay with that. And he will never know that I saw his grade because he wasn't like, everybody look what I got. He was keeping it close to the vest. And when I saw that kind of incidentally, it made me take school a bit more seriously. Yeah. So anyway, but all that informs kind of how I see the work. And one of the things, and I don't mean to jump too far ahead, but one of the things I love about St. Mary's is that you see students of color and students of all backgrounds, first-gen students in STEM. You see them in all, not that STEM is like the only or the highest status, but they're not just in certain areas where they feel like they can be supported and such. That it's not too intimidating, that students do find their ways to all types of majors, not necessarily without challenge, and that they're not typically the only ones. Yeah. And that makes a huge difference. And I've even heard it from students when they were on campus, visiting during my short time here. They're like, you feel the diversity. Now, it's imperfect. It's a small school. But I've been at many other places, and you don't feel it the same way. For a variety of reasons. But anyway, I love that. I love that for our students.
Definitely. In my experience, since I'm a STEM major, there were many times where like I would be halfway through a semester in a like STEM focused class, and then I only then just noticed that I'm one of the few people of color, and because like it's in a way where because again you can feel the diversity, you don't feel this amounting pressure or weird energy around race and ethnicity when you're in classes. Everyone pretty much like treats it all the same, and professors do a great job of like being as objective as possible. And like that's something that I was a shock to me, again, because of the schooling that I went through in the past, but it's great that we have it here.
I think that shows, and I imagine that, faculty benefit from that exposure to talent being manifest, all, racial, ethnic backgrounds, gender, and combinations, right? And low income. 28% of our students are first in their family to go to college. That's huge, right? So they're up in the mix, and so it's not like your presence is unexpected. And I think that takes, aside from the hard work that every student have to make, it takes a burden off of you. And I think that allows you just to be able to just perform to your capacity, your potential. And I love that.
Yeah. And speaking of like the environment at school, how would you describe and establish an open and inclusive environment?
That's the work of all of us. I think someone in my that's something I've always sought to do. From my beginning role, even when I was a graduate student. As an undergrad, I was a commuter, so I wasn't on campus as much, but I wanted to contribute, engage in student organizations. But wherever you find yourself, right, how are you making your community better? And in my role here, that's something that I would do in my neighborhood. I've done in local communities, but that's part of my job, and that's part of what is central to my value system. So with that being said, how do we create opportunities for students to be their best? Well, you attract, support the success of a diverse and talented student body, right? You create an environment where it's not shocking to see students, right? That's kind of fundamental. Um, you have to make it accessible, and I think the thing about higher education is affordability. There's just some fundamental things. How do we keep students' burdens of getting an education, which I still think is immensely valuable, not for your economic future, but also for your growth and learning, for your ability to engage across difference, but to develop your curiosity, to expose you to different ideas, to challenge your own assumptions. I still think that that's important. So, getting back to the question, it's how do we help create environments where students can succeed, right? My job is to support our institution, support the faculty, support the staff, and support our students to participate in programs, to provide strategic assistance that keeps them in school and allows them um, uh, to perform to their potential. So how do we anticipate the needs of students? Well, we know that if somebody's the only one in their major, in their class, in their dorm, they're going to feel isolated, stressed. So how do we diversify the campus? How do we create opportunities that it's not just, that I've been at schools where the students of color are mainly commuters. So at night, the dorms, while the school may be more diverse, on campus, students feel isolated because they have to be everybody's only Latinx friend or only Black friend, and that they have, so just even creating that environment, anticipating the needs of students. Sometimes we got to help students get books. How do we keep them on track? I think some of the programs we have, like the Sousa Brand Scholars, if a student has to drop the class, like I did 3 times as an undergraduate, we can provide support for students to take a winterim class or a summer class to keep them on pace. So that I had to do an extra semester, so that probably cost me another $3,000 in loans. It wasn't that bad, but those small things keep students enrolled, keep students on track, and to know that they, whether me in my role as AVP or kind of the work I'm doing in equity programming, or connecting students to faculty and staff across campus, that they're not in it by themselves. That even if you stumble, people are going to have your back, and anticipating the things and that'll help students be successful. So it's a much more complicated answer, and I apologize, but ensuring there's a diverse faculty, ensuring there's a diverse staff. I think the things that St. Mary's does, today's Wellness Day. Get a day off, take care of yourself. Here's some activities. That's huge. I think the LEAD curriculum, which embeds high impact practices in the curriculum, are huge. That's already here. You don't have to, have specific insight into the value of a small seminar style classroom, research, internships, the St. Mary's Project, right? The SMC?
SMCM project.
Yeah, SMCM project, excuse me. Those are culminating experiences, right? You may not know what that is, but if you're doing one, you're getting some of the best of what a college education can afford you. So it's almost like getting your vegetables and the vitamins while you're just kind of breathing the air, because that's what everybody gets. You're not stuck with ultra-processed foods, right? Or the classes that are easy or being directed. Everyone is challenged and supported in this honors curriculum. And I really, those structural components are things that I fought for at other schools. And when I came here and saw that those structures were in place, I found I was deeply impressed. And those are kind of things that are easy to overlook because, yeah, it's kind of, well, that's how St. Mary's is. But that focus on research, working with faculty on projects and being mentored closely, that does not happen everywhere, and sometimes only to the select few. And so I really think that St. Mary's is at its best, providing an accessible and exceptional education. You know, that curriculum was designed to do precisely that. So they're really ahead in many ways. So we continue to bolster that and never take for granted that while these good things are in place, where do we need to be better? Always asking us that, always in community with the students, and having those real relationships. Like, nobody cares that I'm the AVP. Like, if you have no presence, you know, so what? You know, you've gotta build relationships with students, with the faculty, with the staff, with the administrators, and really be curious so that you can have a positive impact and be supportive and pull in the good ideas that you hear from others.
Nice. I really like that food analogy. That was really good.
Yeah, get your veggies. You know what I mean? I think the curriculum gives you intellectual opportunities that are most impactful and the equivalent of your veggies.
Right, most definitely. And jumping a little bit out of order, but
That's totally fine.
If you were to look 5 years down the road, what would success in the role that you're currently in look like for you?
Well, part of it is, you know, in my current role, we have to stabilize the programs associated with the Office of Equity Programming. My job is much larger, but right now we know that we've had a lot of staff turnover. In the last year, 4 staff members have transitioned in and out. That has been a challenge. I do think that we're around the corner on that, to say that that, you know, if we can stabilize the office, these programs, D'Souza Brent, Sun Primus, Landers, they're special programs. They don't exist everywhere. So we really want to nurture those programs, give them the attention they deserve, which means, and that would translate into supporting the students, which would lead to greater, you know, retention and graduation and student satisfaction and a better campus climate. So I would see that stabilization and creating a culture of excellence, but not perfection. I think among the staff, my sense is that you had everybody that came in cared about students. I will not, but I think there was a consistency of presence that was really challenging for a variety of reasons. And I just got here, and it was a challenging situation for the staff that was here and for, you know, for the students. Our goal is really to reconnect with the students, to earn their trust back, because I think there is a trust deficit, which is understandable. But that's going to take some time, and we're willing to do that. So that's going to be what success means certainly for the Office of Equity Programming, and also successfully navigating the uncertainty of this current political moment, where DEI is a bad word. I don't care what we call it, frankly, because I do think the work that I've always done have been fundamental elements: supporting students, understanding them, and helping them thrive. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, that whether we call it belonging, student success, mentoring, all those are components of DEI work.
Oh, yeah.
Leadership development, career and professional development, they're inseparable from the larger educational enterprise. So we just have to continue doing that and be clear that this still matters. And I know it does. It's central to the mission. But, you know, some of those things are out of our control. Let's focus on the things that we can continue to control. That's, you know, maintain our, you know, the honors promise, continue to stay affordable. And if we learn that it's not as affordable, or what can we do and to lessen the burden, and just continue to stay attuned to the entire student, but also staff and faculty.
Of course. And you already were kind of going into this next question, but if you can delve more deeper into it, How do you or would you navigate resistance or indifference to DEI initiatives?
Well, we can't tell that, you know, in my experience, not resistance sometimes comes from not understanding or maybe kind of a stereotypical notion. And let's be clear, just because somebody has a role doesn't mean they do it well, regardless whether they're, whatever role they may find themselves, whether you're a banker, whether you're an investment, kind of consultant, whether you're a teacher. Not everybody does this well or thoughtfully or with subtlety. So I don't want to assume that if there's resistance, that it's coming from a place of malice or a place of discrimination. Sometimes people aren't clear, and I'm been willing to work with people who are open and sincere about it. I'm even open to hearing, all right, how has the school underperformed? Or sometimes people feel like, oh, if we do DEI, it's gonna go against free speech, which is important. How do we navigate those tensions? Let's talk about that. How have I fallen short, in your opinion? We have to be open to honest feedback. Now, there are going to be people who are just going to be unreasonable. I can't worry about those folks. But if people are sincere, I'm willing to work with them and provide opportunities for them to contribute. Some people are not going to see that as a worthy investment of their time. So I'm not going to, I think we have to strategically invest our time with people who are open, who are curious. Now, I wouldn't just dismiss people who choose to say, I've got to focus on the key pieces of my job. Totally fine. But I think we don't give up on those folks either. Right? So.
Yeah, most definitely. I find that a lot of the conversations around like DEI, especially now, can get very heated because a lot of people are like worried about saying the wrong thing, or they aren't willing to like hear any other side of the story.
Right.
And like we're saying with like having an open mind, I feel like that's the best way to make real change or to like improve things is having open communication and being willing to hear other people's perspectives, because
absolutely,
like, part of DEI is like making people feel belonged, fostering a feeling of belonging. And if you are in a situation where your opinion isn't being heard or you're being silenced, you're not going to feel like you're belonging. And you're going to like resist even further, which is like the complete opposite of like what we want.
Right. You don't want to open your mouth and be like, see, you don't belong here, like, because you're incapable. And someone else doesn't want to open their mouth and be like, oh, you're a racist or you're a homophobe. Now, you may sometimes, look, those are things sometimes that might be in us. If we can create a context where mistakes can be seen as mistakes, not necessarily as like, oh, there goes your character. You're just incapable. You're just not capable, or you're just a bad person. So I think, if we can give each other that grace, and that's not always easy, and it's harder when you're one of the only ones, because you're the one who's constantly enduring it. And students should not have to endure in education, right? Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to be challenged, but if they have to endure constant indignity, even if it's indignities at the hands of people who just don't get you, how many times are you going to let people touch your hair? Yeah. How many times are you going to have people ask you, like, why is your name your name? Why don't you just let people call you Ralph? You know what I mean? I'm like, no disrespect to people who call themselves Ralph. My name is Rafael. You know what I mean? And it might be, that's fine. But if you're constantly defending just who you are, that's really tough. It's emotionally draining, psychologically draining, and will impact your sense of, your ability to focus. And it makes you, I'd rather go to a school maybe less prestigious, but where I'm not just going to have to deal with all that. And so we that takes a lot of work. But I feel like, part of that is the culture building piece. And then going back to the work of DEI, we also have to hold ourselves to standards, right? We, like I said, we have to be able to take criticism. Oh, you don't like DEI. I'm like, tell me why. All right, let's talk about it. We have to be just as open as we hope people will be if a policy is having an impact that disproportionately affects women or, Black students or Latinx students or low-income students. All right, let's remedy that, right? Well, the thing that you're doing is having an impact. Well, I have to listen to that if I can have the support and impact that I'm intending to have. So I think in that regard, that applies. I think we need to bring that to the table too, the professionalism and the openness. We have to model it. But when people are insincere, when people are, don't have genuine intentions, then we have to kind of stand our ground too.